the Merowitz Center. The Merowitz Center, which opened in September of 2019, is located on the first floor of the Covenant Place 2 Kahn family building on the Millstone campus, and it serves as a venue for seniors and senior programming. With the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, programming at the Merowitz Center has switched to the Zoom format, and I'm so pleased that so many people are adapting. To learn more about the menu of Zoom options available through the Merowitz Center, please check out the center's weekly e-blasts and Facebook page. But now it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Mark Shook. Rabbi Shook is a native of Detroit, Michigan. He holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology and Near Eastern studies from the University of Michigan, a bachelor's degree of Hebrew letters, a Bachelor of Hebrew Letters degree, a Master of Arts degree in Hebrew Letters, and a Doctor of Divinity degree from the Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion. Following his retirement in 2010 as Senior Rabbi of Congregation Temple Israel in Creve Coeur, he was named Rabbi Emeritus of the congregation. From 1992 to 2016, he taught Jewish philosophy at St. Louis University. His first historical novel, The Ezra Scroll, was published in 2014. I have to insert a personal comment here that there's a fabulous, exciting, rolling story. If you have any interest in a creative approach to where the Torah came from, you have got to read it. It's really good.
I'm laughing because there was a warning that Susan Kempinen sent out a warning. We're not supposed to promote things on this.
Oh my gosh, she certainly did. I apologize, but I just picked it up to reread it during the pandemic and I'm enjoying it so much.
My check to you, Carla, is in the mail.
I'm sorry. I apologize. But Rabbi Shook has been a law enforcement chaplain since 1973. Since 2010, he's been serving as the chaplain coordinator of the St. Louis County Police, chaplain of the St. Louis Division, FBI, and chaplain of the police, and chaplain of the Creve Coeur Police Department. So it is with that, it's my pleasure to say, please, Rabbi Shook, share with us your thoughts and reflections.
Thank you very much, Carla. This is so strange to have so many people. I've got more people on this Zoom call than I had at Friday night services on Zoom, not Zoom, but streaming on the internet. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us this morning. And I hope you find this informative and interesting as we go along. I have a brief PowerPoint presentation that will probably generate a lot of questions, and I'm going to go through it rather quickly. And if this thing works, it should show up on your screen as soon as I get it up on the screen. There it is. And I hope you can all see this. Can you all see this right now? Okay, well, just nod your heads because I can't hear any speaking, but that's pretty good. Anyway, let's see which control is gonna work this thing. Okay, there we go. So let's start a little bit by the numbers, because as chaplain coordinator for the St. Louis County Police Department, I think you should get a sense of what the chaplaincy program represents to the county police, and then we can talk about other things that go along. The important thing is we have 92 municipalities. 62 of the municipalities have their own police departments. And the St. Louis County Police Department, that figure was somewhat, is already old, actually. There are more sworn police officers in St. Louis County now, over 1,000, thanks to Proposition P. St. Louis Metro Police has 1,357 sworn personnel, and they have 10 chaplains. Our chaplain corps right now has about 19 precinct chaplains. There are 8 precincts in St. Louis County, and each of the precincts has at least 2 chaplains serving them on a close-in basis. Let me see if I can get this to move. Okay. County police initiated a chaplaincy program in 1960. And I have to tell you that program was the program that I signed on for in 1973. Rabbi Alvin Rubin of blessed memory was at the time the president of the St. Louis Rabbinical Association, and the then superintendent of the county police, that was Gilbert Kleineck, called Rabbi Rubin as the head of the Rabbinical Association and said, "You got any rabbis that might be interested in being a police chaplain?" And I was serving as an assistant to Rabbi Rubin at the time. And Rabbi Rubin called me up and he said, "You interested in being a police chaplain?" I said, "Sure, why not?" Had no idea what I was getting into, had no clue. Basically, for the next 20 years, the chaplaincy program was all about giving invocations and benedictions at graduations and retirement parties and other formal events on behalf of the police community. Then it expanded into a precinct chaplaincy where chaplains were designated to serve in the precinct. So right now we have 3 department chaplains, one Catholic, one Protestant, and I'm the Jewish guy. And then we have 17 or 18, 19 now precinct chaplains and 5 auxiliary chaplains. The auxiliary chaplains are basically retired chaplains who can be called upon in an emergency to serve. I'm not going to go through the total responsibilities, but there is a general order in the St. Louis County Police Department that talks about what chaplains are supposed to do. And the most important one is A, being available on a 24-hour basis to provide assistance in the event of serious illness, injury, or death. Perform other functions as requested by the chief of police, but being able to be a representative of the department. All that changed in 2008. The chaplaincy program changed because of a disaster that occurred in Minneapolis. The interstate I-35 bridge collapsed over the Mississippi River. And cars plunged into the river because it was practically at rush hour when this event occurred. And the reason why our program changed was because the head of the Minneapolis Police Department wrote an article about the role of his police chaplains during that disaster. And the article that was written about that disaster was picked up by a commander in the St. Louis County Police Department. And the commander in St. Louis County Police Department basically was at that time the director of special operations. And he contacted the head of the chaplains program, who was Reverend Robert Chisenhall. And Reverend Robert Chisenhall basically responded to then Major Robert Trittler, who came up with this idea that, of course, the chaplains would be interested in doing this program and dealing with it. Now, this is what the chief said. The Minneapolis police opened a family assistance center within 2 hours of the bridge collapse. And then the Family Assistance Center provided psychological first aid, current information to the families of the deceased and the missing. And staff and volunteers were important in providing an environment where family could deal with the issues and feel safe and communicate. This is what it looked like in the water. I have to tell you that the Minneapolis Police Department had a large corps of chaplains to run the Family Assistance Center. So the chaplains took the lead, and that worked wonderfully for us. Basically what happened was, and why that became a model was, that the disaster that occurred in the river pointed out that we should find a way to let police officers be police officers and let people who are trained in family counseling and spiritual assistance in time of disaster do that. And so that's what they let their chaplains do. We began a process in 2008, and we continued it after I became the chaplain coordinator to turn the chaplaincy department into more than just invocations and benedictions, and start to see to it that we got training to deal with disasters and critical incidents. These are called critical incidents. Anyway, that's the basic thing. But could the approach work in St. Louis County? Forgive the graphics, but you got to keep people awake during the presentation. So step by step, we began to build it, train for it, and tested it. And we have so far done so. We created a care and support team where we could be called upon in times of emergencies to provide spiritual and emotional support. And that's what we do. Care and support team operates under something called incident command system. So every one of our chaplains, and now we have added all of the chaplains in the surrounding municipal areas. There are 35 departments in the surrounding municipal areas that have police chaplaincy programs. And we now have over 50 chaplains attending our training program. And part of that training is something called the incident command system, to train chaplains as to how they're supposed to operate in a critical incident, like a natural disaster or, God forbid, an active shooter incident, into how they respond, how they react, how they communicate with one another, and so on and so forth. So that's basically where we're at. This is a scheme of how the incident command system is operated, you don't need to know that, but basically we established a command structure, and we would conduct support team staging before members and provide on-scene support. Have to tell you that the chaplaincy program was involved in an active. Let me see if I can get the slide up here. There was an airport issue with you may remember the Good Friday tornado. We were up and running within minutes of that tornado and providing assistance to the North County communities that had experienced that tornado, including providing chaplains at the Red Cross Community Center where people were gathering. It was Good Friday, and there was a whole issue about this being a holy weekend and how were people going to get through their famed religious services. This photograph was taken of Father Michael Boehm, one of our department chaplains at the time. This was in Ferguson, and this was at the time of the Ferguson civil unrest, and that was another testing point. But we were there in Ferguson for 21 days, along with the police officers there, and our job was basically giving spiritual support to the officers who were on 12-hour shifts, had a difficult time seeing their families, getting home to their families while they were doing this work. And some of them were dealing with very strong feelings about what the protesters were yelling at them while they were on the line. Following Ferguson, we got another lesson about being chaplains, and that was that when you have a critical incident, a serious incident, the incident is not over. They talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome, but the incident was not over in the sense that we conducted 36 sessions with 800 participants, and we were walking them through what they had experienced as a result of the civil unrest in Ferguson. And these are some of the people that participated in those discussions. A side comment I will make is that the day that the Ferguson unrest began with the shooting of Michael Brown, I was called to St. Anthony's Hospital because St. Anthony's Hospital was experiencing an active shooter in a hospice building, which was not in the main part of the hospital, but was away from the hospital building. But an active shooter had entered the hospice building and had brought a bag, presumably a bag filled with weapons, and the nurses and patients in the hospice building were basically in a lockdown situation. And so the County Police Special Operations Command was called. What you see there are the cars from the Special Operations Command, sometimes referred to by the shorthand of Tactical Operations or TAC. At the time, they had no idea where the active shooter was. And so they had to conduct a search of the hospital. And there was a very interesting moment. This is about 2 hours before Michael Brown was shot. There was an interesting moment where the head of the hospital came and asked the county police officers if they would not be wearing their tactical operation gear, which are bulletproof vests and so on and so forth, and that they would come in just wearing their police uniforms. They didn't want to frighten the patients. And I'm thinking to myself, you're asking people to risk their lives against a guy who's carrying weapons inside a hospital, so he obviously doesn't care about the patients. And now you want the officers to stop before they can go in and search the hospital and take off their uniform, take off their tactical gear and put on regular uniforms. It was a little bit absurd. We had no idea that this would be a portent of things to come. Anyway, the way that chaplains are requested is by calling St. Louis County Communications, and you can have chaplains respond at any time and for any purpose, but most of the time the chaplains respond to the precincts for which they're responsible. Okay, so that's the end of my PowerPoint presentation, which I know some of us have a real tough time with boring PowerPoint presentations, but at least it gets the discussion started. Right now, I have to tell you that we have just completed another round of civil unrest call-ups. We have something in the county called Code 1000, Code 2000, Code 3000, where municipalities can ask for assistance from the surrounding municipalities and the county police, and they send officers and supervisors to staging areas so that they can be available in case larger numbers of police are needed to respond. And we had about a 3-week period in Florissant when there was a nightly, daily response to the civil unrest as a result of the shooting in Minneapolis of recent weeks. And now that has calmed down. And then we had the shooting yesterday at the Galleria, which was not a part of any civil unrest, but it certainly describes the need for these kinds of responses where officers will respond from all of these municipalities and come and show up and be there to do what they're trained to do. The chaplains undergo training. They are required to attend training 4 times a year. We've not been able to do that training because of the COVID-19 crisis. We're just kind of interested in keeping our chaplains healthy at the time. And so we've been doing things via Zoom, and chaplains have been actually standing in the parking lots of the precincts and having conversations with the officers as they go in and out of the precincts, as they go in and out for duty. But it's been a very stressful time and a very distressing time for the families of the officers who are quite concerned about the public support for the police officers and the work that they do. I guess I would find a way. I think I'll let the people in charge decide who's going to get their audio turned on so I can hear your questions, and then I'll try to respond to them.
Mark?
Yes. Hi, Kevin.
Actually, I put it in through the chat, but I'll ask it anyway. With the recent challenges in defunding the police and the questions about can social workers, perhaps take on some of the police functions for individuals in their homes, do you see a role for chaplaincy that could take the role of some of the things that police are having to do at the present time? Are you trained for that?
As a matter of fact, yes and no. Okay, I think I need to explain something to everybody here. Maybe 10 years ago, county police adopted a program that began in Memphis, Tennessee called the Crisis Intervention Team Program. This is a 40-hour training program for police officers and police personnel, which I, by the way, attended and got certified as. Certified crisis intervention team people are people who are trained to deal with people having a mental health crisis. And in the early days, when we didn't have officers throughout the entire department, you would hear on the radio, it was not unusual to hear a supervisor say, can somebody send me a crisis intervention team person to deal with someone who is having a mental health crisis? And the principles of that are exactly the principles that people are touting now about having non-police response to things that in essence are mental health crises. And what we don't get, unfortunately, is a sense of the number of times that CIT officers, now they're about 75% of the department has been trained in CIT training. And this is a cooperative venture between behavioral health services, between the National Institute for Mental Health, NAMI, the St. Louis hospitals that have mental health, and the courts in St. Louis, so that officers can help a person who is having a mental health crisis be admitted to the hospital instead of having to go to jail for what is going on there. So it's been a really big deal over the last 10 years. And now most of the officers, including officers in some of the municipalities, are trained as crisis intervention team officers. That has done an amazing thing in terms of reducing the number of times when officers felt the only thing they had, the only tool they had in their toolbox was to draw weapons and start tasing people. That was just, it's been an amazing thing. Now you asked the question about chaplains. Right now, about 1/4 of our chaplains are trained in the crisis intervention team concept. But that is not, we are volunteers. I want you to know that, okay? The only thing we get out of this thing is every once in a while I get a new polo shirt with a county logo on it. That's a pretty big deal. I also have, and our chaplains have ballistic vests, which can be handy when you're giving sermons. But the thing is that we are not paid. We are all volunteers. And you cannot have a response to mental illness that has volunteers. It needs to be people who are standing by and ready to go at a moment's notice. Now, the way things happen, there had to be some adjustments in some state laws that would allow people to be committed on the say-so of a trained officer. So I don't know if I have the time to explain this, but let's suppose we have an emotionally disturbed person who is really having a tough time. Perhaps they're off their meds, whatever. And the officer who arrives, who is CIT trained, realizes that what's going on here is a mental health crisis and wants to get this person into a hospital. His job will be to convince the person to go voluntarily to the hospital. And by the way, in 99% of the time, they do. They listen to the officers. They understand that they have having a crisis and they need to be admitted to the hospital so that they can get their meds regulated or whatever. Well, the courts had to change something in the law so that the hospitals would admit that person for that kind of treatment on the basis and say so of the officer alone, and not need a medical person to intervene before that person could be hospitalized. That transformation has taken place. And why? Because the officers have the training to know when someone is dealing with a mental health crisis. So that's a big deal. But chaplains are not full-time. Chaplains are volunteers, and they're committed to serve whenever called, and they will. But this is a full-time problem. On any given day, each precinct may be facing 2 or 3 mental health issues that they have to deal with. The good news is they don't have to call for a specialist anymore. Most of the officers on the street have been trained in the crisis intervention team training. It's a great program.
Great question. Rabbi, it looks like Harvey Gerstein has had his hand up. Can you?
Hi, Harvey.
Are you still there? And then it looks also, then we've got a question that Terry Weiss has asked that we'll address next.
Okay. Harvey, are you unmuted or?
Yeah, I just wanted to know what's the effect on the morale of the police right now with all the movement to defund and what's going on across the country?
I think the mood is very poor. I don't know how to describe it. I would say the mood is quite apprehensive about what this means. And part of the problem is that we don't have enough people in authority who are defining what they think this defund the police means. I can tell you that there are a lot of people in St. Louis County, even within the police structure, people who are responsible for law enforcement, who understand that what can raise the level of policing is about certification of police officers and the idea that you don't have toxic officers move from department to department to find another job somewhere else. That is one of the issues that has to be taken care of. But there's a lot of uncertainty. I tell you what's got the morale down most of all is a sense that the work they do, the 12-hour shifts they've been serving for the last 3 months to respond to these emergencies and the constant call up is very disruptive to their family life. And it's mainly that, on top of all the stress brought by COVID-19 responses. The health department and the police department have been monitoring and taking care of the rise in COVID-19 patients, and at the same time they've got to find a way to take care of the officers who may have been exposed. Not that they've been found to have COVID-19, but they may have been exposed. What do? Do they send them home to their families after they've had a day working with people and may have been exposed and so on and so forth? So there've been a lot of problems that have put a tremendous amount of stress on police families. They're the ones that feel it the most.
Thank you. It looks like we've got a question from Terry Weiss, who wrote, "Are you familiar with the Ceasefire versus Cure Violence programs?"
No, I'm not. Sorry, I can't. Send me information on it. You can send it to my email address, but I am not familiar with that program. And I got to tell you, we're in a very fast-moving situation, and on a daily basis, what we know and what we don't know about policing and law enforcement are changing as people try to find responses to things. I can tell you that at least for the local municipalities that participate in the crisis intervention team program, and the number of non-lethal approaches to issues that have to do with crime on the streets and so on and so forth, that the local community is very dedicated to finding ways about this. Remember that we are operating in the post-Ferguson environment, and Ferguson brought a number of reforms to the way policing was done. And the most important of all was the number of municipalities and departments that were gaining about 90% of their income from traffic arrests. And the traffic arrest was a major point of conflict and harm. And so that has basically, for a lot of these departments, been eliminated. And then it's caused the departments not being able to have sufficient finances to go alone, and they have consolidated with other departments. We have a North County Police Cooperative that would not have been created had it not been for the post-Ferguson reforms. The most important reform in policing today is the need for each and every department to be certified as accredited by the Law Enforcement Accreditation Association, so that there are standards that are met with regard to training, with regard to retraining, with regard to ongoing continuing education. That's all very important. Some of our local departments have it and some of our departments don't. And anything you guys can do to advocate in your local departments in the area, that would be great. I can only tell you that most of the departments that serve the largest percentage of the Jewish community are certified CALIA accredited. So that's a good news.
Thanks, Rabbi. I see that we've got Mr. Schneider who's raising his hand, and then also after that, I'll have you answer a question that was typed in by Sid Goldstein.
Okay.
Mark, in your many years as serving as a police chaplain, what has been the experiences that you received from people you were called upon to serve when they found out you were a rabbi rather than a Christian minister?
I got to tell you one story. I probably have too many stories, but I'll tell you one story.
Oh, don't think.
So I was riding along at the time. This is a number of years ago. Riding along at a time with an officer who happened to be Jewish, one of our Jewish officers. And the officer who is Jewish, this is not the recent past. This is a little more distant past. We were patrolling the area, oddly enough, around the JCC. That was his zone of patrol in the Central County Precinct. And the officer was really a character. He no longer is a police officer. He went on to a law career. I think, thank God for the policing. I'm not so sure about thank God for the law, but he went on. We won't mention names. Anyway, he gets a call for a person who was wandering through a condominium, knocking on doors and disturbing the residents of the condominium. Okay. And he says to me before we get to the condominium, he says, Rabbi, he said, I'm not going to tell the woman that the person standing next to me is a rabbi. She's already dealing with enough trauma. I don't have to tell her that the guy at the door is a rabbi. Now, based on the person who was placing the call, we knew that this person had a high probability of being Jewish, okay? Mrs. Ginsburg was probably Jewish. We took a wild fly at that, and he figured it would be more traumatic for her to deal with the fact that the officer was Jewish and then he was standing with the rabbi. Like, what kind of county police situation is this? I get a rabbi and a police officer who's Jewish. And while I'm on the subject of Jewish officers and that kind of thing, I note that one of our participants is the mother of a St. Louis County police detective. And I'm very proud of him and I'm very proud of her. And I think he's a wonderful guy. And I'm not going to mention any names because unless she decides to mention it, that's up to her. I won't. But he's a wonderful guy. And I met him for the first time in Ferguson, which was a very interesting experience. But I want to give you one thought. This would have been something in the summary, but we need to encourage more of our Jewish kids to consider careers in law enforcement. We should not have to think about how few police officers who happen to be Jewish we have in the world. This should be something that you shouldn't have to say, why would I want my kid to become a police officer? It's an honorable profession, and we need to keep people who are highly educated, well-educated, participating in this kind of a program. We need our police. The county says that the chaplaincy program has to reflect the department. I can tell you, we got a lot of police officers who are married to Jewish people, as well as Jewish police officers. So,
Rabbi, Sid Goldstein has asked, do Missouri officers have the ability to get someone to a hospital?
I'm not sure what the question implies. In other words, is the person having a first aid crisis or a mental health crisis?
Sorry, in terms of a mental crisis.
Yes. Yes, they do. But most of the time, because of all kinds of legal liabilities, and this is one of those things where you get you have two things. One, get the person in crisis the care they need as quickly as possible. And two, prevent the entire department from being sued because you did not get the person physical help while you were dealing with a mental health crisis. So there are all kinds of procedures and things that take place to make sure that the person is in good physical health before they're taken to the hospital. And the easiest way, how can I say this? We, the community that I'm speaking to right now, and you know who you are, we don't realize how good we have it in terms of our emergency medical responders who come from our fire departments. Every one of our fire departments in this area are wonderful in terms of dealing with persons who have mental health crises. And they're close to us and they respond quickly. So the idea that an officer can't pick up the radio and simply call and say, I need an ambulance here to help me transport someone who is emotionally disturbed to the hospital, these are people who care. And it's a good group and they do a great job.
That's a great segue to a question from Nancy Solomon. And then I see we have a question from, I think it's Terry Weiss. Nancy's question is, what is in place to support chaplains after critical events? And then she continued and said she thinks it takes about 2 years to complete CALEA certification.
CALEA certification, yes.
And some departments are in the process.
Yes.
Completed. Any comments?
Back in the day, I used to run a summer camp for children, and I wanted that camp to be certified by the American Camping Association. Certification has a lot to do with making sure that each of these departments have the proper procedures in place, that they require the proper training, that the officers get the proper training, that they have the proper equipment, and that the procedures are in place to deal with issues that arise on a daily basis in departments. How do you transport prisoners? In what kind of vehicle do you transport them? All of these things. I have even, we laughingly refer to the CALEA checkup as like the equivalent of a colonoscopy for a police department. That's basically what it amounts to. They come in, people from outside your department come in and they examine everything that your department is doing, and you apply for that examination so that you can get the certification. I even have to show my chaplain records. I have to show that I have quarterly reports on hand, that I have their applications, and that I have their background checks to demonstrate that we've gone through all the procedures in terms of having the chaplains. Now, you ask a great question about support and backup for the chaplains. There is an organization in the St. Louis region, but it's a national program called Critical Incident Stress Management, CISM. And Critical Incident Stress Management is a program, another training program that a number of our chaplains have gone through. And when a department goes through a critical incident, I'll give you an example. I was called to a hospital in the area when a child was brought in who had drowned as a result of a birthday party at a hotel. And the EMS, the emergency medical workers, and the nurses in the hospital requested a stress debriefing at the hospital so that they could go through everything that happened in the course of the event. These stress debriefings will have one person who represents a peer group, like the firefighters or the police officers, and sometimes we have both of them present, a person who is a mental health professional, and then a coordinator who will go in, and also a chaplain might be there at that event. And we listen to these people talk about what happened, everything that happened in the critical incident, and so on and so forth. And they talk to one another about what happened. And in the course of this discussion, invariably it comes up. Someone finds out something that happened during the critical incident that they didn't know that was helpful for them dealing with it. One person thought that he did not do enough to help this child, thought he could have saved him in the pool, revived him, and so on and so forth. He had no idea until someone in the critical incident debriefing told him that the child had been on the bottom of the pool for 20 minutes before the police and fire department arrived. And that the call, they didn't know that the child was missing, is the point. And so he found out during the stress debriefing that there was nothing he could do. Now, as far as chaplains are concerned, we're kind of a close club. We stress debrief one another. We're all constantly asking ourselves, how are we doing with each and every event? We have no trouble speaking to one another about how we're feeling. Sometimes our police officers have a lot of issues about expressing feelings at the time, and that's what they need to do. Chaplains in general don't have a problem expressing feelings. They're all about feelings, and they know how healthy and how important it is for us to deal with one another on a first name basis and to be able to confide in one another.
Thanks, Rabbi. I probably also say that there looks like there's several more questions that are coming in through the Zoom chat, and I'm happy to read them aloud. But I don't want to step on anyone's toes. So if somebody would actually like to speak to you directly and ask the question, there is a raise hand function that you can click, or just unmute your mic and or raise your or send me a message, so I'll let you know. But the next one in order is from Michael Packman, who would like to know if you have ever served as a chaplain in a jail or a prison. And then it looks like I see questions then from Nancy Nix Rice and from Marilyn.
I'm looking at the list on the chat thing, so I'll respond to them as I see them. If that's
excellent. Okay. Thank you.
I'm not totally illiterate when it comes to the issue. What was the initial one I was going to respond to from Michael Packman? Chaplain in a prison. So several years ago, one of our chaplains asked me if it would be okay for him to serve as a chaplain in the county jail. And I basically took it to the supervisory staff of the St. Louis County Police Department. And they said that they understand the need for chaplains in the county jail, but you can't have a police chaplain being the chaplain to the prisoners in the county jail. It's one of these conflict of interest things where you've got two competing things going at the same time, and they want chaplains in the jail and they want chaplains for the police department, but never the twain shall meet. It was very kind of an interesting response that we got. They see them as totally different, and it may have to do with confidentiality. You know, when we sit with an officer in a police car, and one of the major things we do is ride-alongs with our police officers as they're serving. That's why the bulletproof vests. When we do that, we have the car has it's like Las Vegas or the shield of the confessional. What's said in the car stays in the car. That we cannot share any information, anything going on, conversations between a chaplain and a police officer, because he is a chaplain and riding with that officer. It has, in essence, the same confidentiality, so that someone who is doing an investigation about something can't subpoena the rabbi or the chaplain or the priest or the minister and say, what did that officer say to you after such and such an event? I'm sorry. It's just not possible. Now, the other part of that confidentiality is that we are, by rule and by general order, we are forbidden from speaking to the press. So when you are in a critical incident and a reporter sees that there's a chaplain standing by and they want to interview the chaplain, our response is supposed to be, and I constantly remind the chaplains over and over again, sorry, under the rules of the chaplaincy, I can't respond. You need to talk to the public information officer. It's really important that we maintain that kind of separation, because the police officers need to trust the chaplains. And if they don't trust the chaplains, the chaplaincy program is dead. Let's see. What are your thoughts on the issue of police unions and their role in protecting the few bad apples who tarnish the reputation of the larger profession? I am, one, in favor of police unions, and two, not in favor of police unions protecting bad apples. That's as succinct as I can do. And you know, I think it's kind of important. And I think all of us need to say, we think it's important for having an organization that worries about the welfare of the police officers, but not to the detriment of the department. And the detriment of the department is when you have an officer and you're protecting someone who needs to be fired. I mean, that's, you know, that's just out there. I'm not going to win any friends in the department because of that, at least the police officers who are members of the union. But I see the need for the union. The union is an important thing, but not when it protects people who need to be retired. I'll probably be retired after this. Let's see, what else? Have you come across human trafficking situations or situations you suspect might be? And if so, what steps do you take? Chaplains and police officers doing ride-alongs see a lot of stuff. And they get called to a lot of things in a lot of places that are really kind of nasty. There are a lot of situations where you get calls where human well-being and welfare and children and awful living conditions are part of what you're experiencing. When you get back in the car with the officer, you have a conversation about what are you going to do about this? What's your thought? What are you thinking? What do you think is really happening? The officer on the street is not going to be the one to fix the situation. He's going to contact the Bureau of Crimes Against Persons and the one that deals with things like sex abuse. And the sex abuse unit in the Bureau of Crimes Against Person is the one that is going to deal with and take the report further. Yes, there is human trafficking in St. Louis County. And yes, it goes on. And a lot of the stuff that happens on major thoroughfares in and out of the county. I'm thinking of highways that come from the south, come from the west, that come through St. Louis, and the officers are well aware of this, and they're looking, and those are the incidents that they're looking at, and sometimes they get intelligence that says this would be a worthy stop if they come across this person along the way. There's a lot of good communication that goes on. It doesn't happen by accident. I think another thing that would surprise people is the number of explosive devices that are dealt with on a weekly basis by the area. This is one of the cooperative things that St. Louis City and County work together on what's called the Bomb and Arson Squad. And these are the people that deal with explosive devices and investigate suspicious fires. And it's not just the city and the county, it's the city and county together. They are one unit. And the same is true of the Metro Air Support, which is city and county, who sponsor the helicopter that does crime scene investigations and finding suspects and so on and so forth. So there's that kind of cooperation that goes on a regular basis. As far as training, the county exited the St. Louis City Police Academy. What do you think of their redoing for mutual benefit? That's a very interesting one. I used to have to do all my invocations for graduation classes would take place at the City Academy because it was a joint academy. And then they separated. I think they separated primarily for funding reasons, that the county was willing to support it and to support a more rigorous training academy. The other thing was that the St. Louis City, at the time of the split, was still under I don't want to call it leadership, but was under the supervision of the state of Missouri, which the county police were not under the supervision of the state of Missouri. That has since been changed legally, so that added something to it. How many faiths are represented today? We have 9 religious denominations, 9 faiths, religious denominations, including Muslim, as chaplains in the county police department. We have, as I say, 17 chaplains, 9 racially. Of the 17, we have, I think, 7 African-American chaplains of a host of denominations. So I think we're pretty diverse in it. Someone said to me, we have a rabbi leading the program because he's the only one that can get the Christians to talk to one another. So you didn't hear me say that, but that's one of the issues. I co-chair a committee on human trafficking. Oh, okay. Appreciate your thorough response. It's going on in the area. Human trafficking is an issue, and it has to do with where we are geographically in the United States and how quickly people can get from Texas, for example, from Mexico, and get to St. Louis that way. That's one of the ways in New Orleans and Texas and ports of entry, that kind of thing. See if I have any other questions. That's anybody else?
I have a question. I have a comment.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much. I just have a comment. And my
Sure.
son is a police officer, and when he first started, he had a lot of contact with Rabbi Shook. It was during Ferguson, and Rabbi Shook saved him. I think if Rabbi Shook hadn't been there, I don't know how he would have made it through, and it meant so much. I'm going to choke up, but it meant so much to me. And I know my son just adores you. But I also think we all owe a lot of gratitude to Rabbi Schick for representing the Jewish community in the Chaplain program. And as he said, it's a volunteer program, and I can only imagine how many hours he has put into it. So I just wanted to thank you so much.
Well, Roberta, thank you. And you might remember the detective I said, who was a wonderful guy and everything else. That's her son. So
Thank you. Thank you.
and congratulations on his first wedding anniversary. We had a wonderful discussion about that yesterday, or 2 days ago, whatever it was. Anyway, the other thing that you may not realize is that my grandchildren are my grandsons, my daughter's sons are their father is an agent with the FBI. So I've got a family stake in this kind of thing. So they're in law enforcement. So.
Well, I knew what you were doing, but I didn't understand it to this extent. So I want to thank you. That's really interesting. Are there any other questions that anybody else has? I believe or any other thoughts to bring in? Oh, it looks like Leonard, did you?
Hey, Leonard, how are you? Hey, Leonard.
You might have to unmute yourself.
Now am I okay?
Yes.
Now you're great. Okay.
If somebody makes a 911 call and reports that a relative has threatened suicide, is there a procedure by the police to remove that person from wherever they are and put them in a safe place to prevent the suicide? Is there special training for that? Because I have a circumstance where the officer was talked out of taking the person to some safe place, and the suicide occurred. And I wondered if that has been corrected.
I'm very sorry to hear that. That's something that that's not my experience, and I apologize. I feel very badly that something like that would happen. The procedure basically is 911 calls, and the call would come out something in the order of, we have a suicide in progress, or it's either a suicide in progress, or the other kind of call is a check the welfare of. And a check the welfare is when someone that you love or know or whatever expresses to you that they're thinking of taking their life, but they don't sound like they're imminent. You call the police, and the police will say, check the welfare, and they'll go to the location, and they will try to speak with the person there. At the time that they're going to the location and speaking, I'm hopeful that one of our CIT officers will be the one that will be responding to the call, and then they will do basically an on-the-spot evaluation and whether or not this person is having a mental health crisis. If they determine that the person has a mental health crisis, they definitely can get the person to a place of safety. And that's the first thing we want to do, is we want to make sure that they're safe for the time being. I'm sorry about the call that your friend or family member or whatever had experienced, but that's not been my experience. We get about 60 calls a day for suicides, both in progress and unfortunately completed, and every one of them is handled as best we can. It's a terrible tragedy.
Thank you.
I wanted to tell you guys, I don't know if you're interested, but the chaplains are supposed to serve 8 hours over a 3-month period. That is, being active and being with the police department at the precinct stations and so on. It's supposed to do 8 hours in a 3-month period. I've been averaging about 50 hours in 3-month periods, so it goes with the territory.
Are you getting overtime pay?
Yeah, I'm getting overtime pay, but not in this life.
Thank you, Rabbi.
At least I hope I'm getting overtime pay. Thank you all for your support. You need to understand that it's really important for all of our departments local and national, to understand that there are people who support them, but at the same time who want the best kind of policing possible, which means police officers who are educated, who are well-trained, and who know what the laws of the land are.
Mark, I just want to say thank you very much for all that you do and for continuing to educate us, which we always enjoy. Your
Thanks, Dan.
presentations.
Thank you.
Looks like there's one last question that came through. Rabbi, do you see it?
I just wanted to make a comment. I'm on the phone. And Rabbi, thank you very much. That was very informative. And I can see where that we need more. Do you have a clone? We need more of you.
Well, I was reminded that two of my colleagues, Rabbi Joe Davidson and Cantor Rabbi Ron Eischiger, have now joined the chaplaincy ranks. They're now serving as chaplains in Baldwin. And it's really interesting that the departments are sort of catching on that this is something that can be of great value to them. And so if your department has a chaplaincy program, you should encourage them to do that.
I don't know. Does University City have a chaplain program?
As a matter of fact, Rabbi Heshi, I forget what Rabbi Heshi last name is, but yes, he is one of their chaplains. They have a Lubavitcher rabbi who is
Novak.
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 Heshi, thank you. Couldn't come up with it. Roberta, thank you for supplying that. It's like, this is what happens when I get to be this age. Can't remember everybody's name. Rabbi Novak has attended our training sessions and is very active in the University City Police Chaplaincy Program.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Is there anything else I can tell you? No?
How many of our police departments in the metro area have chaplaincy programs?
In addition to the city and county, 35 in the area have chaplaincy programs. They have at least one chaplain. And this is, the chaplains that train with us are as far west as Wright City and as far east as Alton, Illinois. We have 3 Illinois chaplains, and the rest of them on this side of the river, and we go all the way out to, as I say, Wright City, and Washington, Missouri. So we cover a lot of territory. But it's like we're an active going program in terms of our training of chaplains, and we do the training at the emergency operations for St. Louis County. Most of our training is done there because it's a very wonderful place to do training. We sometimes do training at the academy if we have a police academy in Wellston, if we have a specific program we need to conduct there. Our training, you should know, is based on an article about the legality of police chaplaincy. I'm surprised no one asked me, is this constitutional, separation of church and state and all of that. There was a legal opinion handed down that if chaplains were trained for the purpose of crisis intervention and spiritual intervention in critical incidents, that it would be okay, that these chaplaincy would be fine. If the training was religious focused, it would not be okay. So we had a whole list of 9 or 10 things that we needed to train chaplains for, and we have provided that on a rotating basis. We train the chaplains constantly about critical incidents, and we've done simulations of disasters, and we've done programs where the chaplains got a chance to be captive in an active shooter situation that was conducted, a drill that took place in a motel-like situation where the chaplains became the hostages of the bad shooters. And you got a chance up front to see the tactics of the police department and see how they go about this thing.
It looks like Mike Zinberg has his hand up.
So right now it seems like there's these totally different realities for police officers and their families and other people in the community who
11 o'clock
who are not comfortable with police, maybe have had traumatic experiences. Mm-hmm. What can we do as community members to foster better relationships between the police force and the community at large?
I think first and foremost, every community probably has some kind of police committee, and you should find out when the police committee meets and when they have, under the sunshine laws, those meetings probably have to be open to the public, and make an effort to attend the police meeting in your community, and let people know that this is of interest to you, that you want a humane and community-based policing program, and that you have the right to advocate for that, and we do, and we should advocate for that. I can tell you that since 1973, I rode along with a bunch of dinosaurs in the police department. I'm telling you that policing has changed radically. In the 70s and 80s, about 90% of our police officers were military veterans, and that was a whole different kind of personnel to draw from as far as policing. And then after the Vietnam War concluded and other things, we went into a lull where most of our officers came to us from civilian professions, and now we're back up because of the number of veterans that are seeking jobs, and policing seems to be available to them. And based on the number of police officers that are retiring because they can or because they want to, there will be a large influx of officers. We have to try and keep the pressure on to our communities to see to it that we get the best and the brightest of the people that are applying. It's really important that the screening process is working in our favor.
Well, not surprisingly, thank you, Rabbi. We are that hour went fast. Thank you so much. I want to thank you on behalf of myself and of all of the attendees who signed up to participate in this program. It was very informative, and I hope you'll consider doing it again.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thank you, everyone, for joining
Thanks,
us.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank
See
you.
on more Mirowitz Center events, I hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, be well.